In the roaring heart of Las Vegas, a grinning showman taunted a silent legend. What should have been another flashy night of MMA turned unforgettable when John Cena mocked Chuck Norris's age, and the crowd demanded a response. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical 75-year-old spectator. For half a century, he was a world karate champion and Hollywood's most feared screen fighter. Once celebrated for finishing matches before opponents even landed a hit. When Cena pressed him to step inside the cage, he had no idea he was inviting precision honed by decades of discipline. Chuck's quiet advance and measured stance were the prelude to a strike that would ripple far beyond the octagon. What began as a joke, at a legend's expense, became a masterclass in respect. The Las Vegas arena, built for entertainment, would never forget the night when one perfect punch redefined power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Las Vegas arena hummed with electricity, each seat filled to capacity, every voice melding into a deafening roar that ricocheted off the walls and back again. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished octagon at center stage, where two fighters circled each other like predators, their skin glistening with sweat under the merciless glare. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, capturing every feint, every strike. Fans shouted from every corner, some waving banners, others leaning forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the combatants below. The night's energy felt alive, almost tactile, charged with the promise of something momentous. In the middle of this controlled chaos sat Chuck Norris, calm and composed in the VIP section. Dressed in a simple black button-up and jeans, he did not move. No entourage surrounded him. No attention-seeking gestures. Yet eyes naturally drifted toward him. At 75, he sat effortlessly poised, one hand resting loosely on his knee, the other by his side. No grin, no cheers, just focus. His eyes never left the octagon. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, cutting through the din. "What a night we have ahead of us. The fighting capital of the world welcomes you to Titans Unleashed." The crowd's roar swelled in response. Signs waved frantically overhead. "Cena rules the ring, and the champ is here," dominated the sea of placards. All eyes inside centered on one man who wasn't even fighting yet, John Cena, a rising star in MMA after his legendary wrestling career, known not just for his skill but for how he won. Arrogant, flashy, ruthless. Tonight, he sat ringside as a special guest, soaking in the adulation. He thrived on spectacle, lived to dominate not only his opponents but the crowd. Every move he made seemed calculated to provoke reaction. He bounced slightly in his seat, glancing at cameras, acknowledging fans with that trademark grin. People either loved him or hated him, but no one ignored him. "First up tonight," the announcer continued, "two hungry contenders looking to make their mark." In the octagon, the undercard fighters locked up. The crowd's attention split, half watching the action, half still focused on Cena, who occasionally pointed at the fighters and made commentary to those seated near him, drawing laughs. "Did you see that?" he called out loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. "That's how amateurs throw punches." More laughter followed. The undercard fight ended quickly. A technical knockout that sent the loser staggering. Medical staff rushed in, while the victor paraded around the cage, playing to the audience. The crowd surged with energy, but it was merely the appetizer. Cena stood, adjusting his baseball cap, and the camera crew immediately swarmed him. The jumbotron switched to his face, and the audience erupted. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice cut through again, "please welcome the 16-time world champion, the face that runs the place, John Cena." Cena raised his hands, basking in the adulation. The interviewer thrust a microphone toward him. "John, great to have you here tonight. Any thoughts on what we've seen so far?" "Well," Cena began, his voice dripping with charisma, "these young guys have heart. I'll give 'em that. But heart only gets you so far in this business." He flashed his $1,000,000 smile. "When you've been at the top as long as I have, you learn that domination isn't just physical, it's mental." As Cena continued his impromptu speech, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. Near the tunnel entrance, security personnel had straightened. A murmur began spreading from section to section like wildfire. Chuck Norris had arrived. Unlike Cena's flamboyant presence, Chuck entered quietly. No music heralded his approach. No spotlight sought him out. Yet his entrance created an immediate gravity. Fans, who noticed him, nudged companions, and pointed. Cell phones rose in unison. The announcer, noticing the disturbance, glanced toward the commotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice suddenly reverent, "we have another legend in attendance tonight. Please welcome martial arts icon, Chuck Norris." A cheer rose, different from the one that had greeted Cena. Less frenzied, more respectful. Chuck acknowledged it with a simple nod, making his way to his seat. No waving. No playing to cameras. Just dignified movement. Cena paused mid-sentence, eyes narrowing slightly before his grin widened even further. Well, he said. "Looks like they're letting anyone in these days." The crowd's reaction was mixed, nervous, laughter, sprinkled with a few uncomfortable glances. Chuck settled into his seat, expression unchanging. If he heard Cena's comment, he gave no indication. The announcer, sensing tension, quickly redirected. "Let's get ready for our next bout of the evening." But Cena wasn't finished. He leaned toward the interviewer's microphone again. "You know, I grew up watching Chuck Norris on TV. My grandma loved those old Walker, Texas Ranger reruns." His tone was playful, but the barb was clear. The crowd's energy shifted again, some laughed louder, feeding Cena's confidence, while others glanced between the two men, sensing the disrespect. Throughout it all, Chuck remained still, eyes forward on the octagon. The only movement was a subtle adjustment of his posture, shoulders squaring almost imperceptibly, jaw setting slightly firmer. The next fighters entered the cage. The announcer's voice rose to introduce them, but the real tension wasn't between the competitors. It lay in the charged silence between the young showman and the aging legend, between brash youth and quiet experience. As the fighters touched gloves in the center of the octagon, Cena stood again, ostensibly to get a better view. But his gaze drifted toward Chuck, and a small, calculated smirk played across his lips. The opening bell rang, slicing through the arena's roar. But for those watching closely, a different match had already begun. The undercard fights blazed by in a blur of technical displays and raw aggression. Young fighters with something to prove threw themselves into combat with reckless abandon. Some emerging victorious, others being helped from the octagon by medical staff. But despite the action inside the cage, the audience's attention kept drifting to the unexpected subplot developing at ringside. Each time the camera panned to John Cena for reaction shots, his comments grew bolder, his gestures more theatrical. After a particularly brutal knockout, he stood and mimicked the finishing blow, playing to his fans. The crowd ate it up, chanting his name between fights. Cena! Cena! Through it all, Chuck Norris remained a study in stillness. He applauded respectfully after each match, regardless of outcome, his focus never wavering from the fighters. Unlike the animated Cena, Chuck's presence commanded attention through its sheer gravity rather than its volume. During a brief intermission, The arena's energy simmered as highlight reels played on the jumbotron. Vendors hawked overpriced beer and merchandise. Fans stretched their legs. The announcer's voice cut through the din. Ladies and gentlemen, while our fighters prepare for the main event, let's chat with our special guest. John Cena. Care to share some thoughts on tonight's action? The crowd roared as Cena bounded up the steps and into the octagon, taking the microphone with practiced ease. He circled the cage like he owned it, playing to each section of the audience. Las Vegas, he bellowed. Are you not entertained? The response was deafening. I've got to say, these young fighters tonight, they're bringing the heat. Cena's charisma filled the arena. But you know what I've noticed? None of them have that killer instinct yet. That thing that separates the legends from the forgotten. He paused dramatically, his eyes sweeping the crowd until they landed deliberately on Chuck Norris. Speaking of legends, or should I say, former legends, Cena's voice dropped an octave, taking on a theatrical quality. We've got Chuck Norris with us tonight. Chuck, stand up, let the people see you. A spotlight swung toward Chuck, who remained seated, his expression unchanged. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some cheering, some shifting uncomfortably at the direct call-out. Come on, Chuck, Cena persisted, his smile never faltering. Don't be shy. Or is it just too hard to get up these days? Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. A few fans booed, but many more laughed along with Cena's brash humor. You know, I grew up watching Chuck on TV, Cena continued, pacing the cage. Walker. Texas Ranger, right? Great show, for its time. He emphasized the last words. But let's be real. Chuck's, what, 75? Now? In this game, that's practically ancient history. The crowd's laughter grew, but so did the undercurrent of discomfort. Cameras cut between Cena's animated performance and Chuck's impassive face. I mean, no disrespect to the classics, Cena added, though his tone suggested otherwise. But this is 2025. The game has changed. Today's fighters are faster, stronger, more technical. He flexed dramatically. Evolution, baby. Some fans whooped in agreement, while others glanced toward Chuck, curious about his reaction. Still, the martial arts legend remained composed, only the slightest tightening around his eyes, betraying any response to Cena's increasingly pointed jabs. You know what would be wild? Cena continued, building momentum. Chuck Norris, stepping into an octagon today. He gestured around him. Can you imagine? I mean, the man's a legend, but legends belong in history books. This, he stomped his foot on the canvas. This is reality. This is now. The crowd's energy shifted again, a palpable tension building. Some fans began to look uncomfortable with the direction Cena was taking. Others leaned forward, sensing drama unfolding. What do you say, Chuck? Cena called out directly. Too old for the real thing? Rather stick to choreographed movie fights and roundhouse kick memes? At this, something subtle changed in the arena. A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing in volume. From somewhere in the upper sections, a lone voice called out, Chuck! 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 The chant was hesitant at first. Just a few scattered voices. Then another section picked it up. And another. Chuck! 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 It spread like wildfire, building in volume until it rivaled the cheers for Cena himself. The announcer, sensing the crowd's shifting mood, stepped forward to reclaim the microphone, but Cena waved him off. Wow. Guess Chuck still has some fans. Cena laughed, but a flicker of surprise crossed his features. He hadn't expected this pushback. Hey, I'm just having some fun, Chuck knows that? Right, Chuck? Chuck finally moved. Slowly, deliberately. He stood. The arena quieted instantly. All eyes drawn to his measured movements. He made no gesture toward the cage, no acknowledgement of Cena's taunts. He simply stood, straightened his black button-up shirt, and gazed calmly toward the octagon. The silence was deafening. Even Cena seemed momentarily at a loss, his perpetual grin faltering for just an instant before he recovered. "Well, look at that! The legend rises," Cena exclaimed, but his voice held a new note: uncertainty. "Still got some life in those old bones after all." Chuck said nothing. He simply maintained eye contact with Cena, his gaze level and unwavering. No anger, no offense taken, just quiet, immovable focus. The crowd's chant began again, louder this time, with more conviction. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Cena, feeling the momentum slipping, doubled down. "Tell you what, Chuck, why don't you come show us what you've got? Step into a real fighter's world. Or is a real octagon too scary compared to a movie set?" The chanting grew louder, drowning out even Cena's amplified voice. Phones were raised everywhere, recording the unexpected confrontation. Social media was already exploding with clips and hashtags. Number Cena vs Norris was trending within minutes. Chuck remained standing, his silence more powerful than any retort. The contrast was stark. Cena all motion and noise, Chuck all stillness and gravity. They represented two entirely different definitions of strength, clashing across generations. The announcer finally managed to edge in, taking the microphone back from Cena. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank John Cena for those, spirited comments, and get ready for our main event." But the crowd wasn't ready to move on. The chanting continued, growing more insistent. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Something was happening, something unplanned, unexpected, electric. The narrative of the evening had been hijacked. The scheduled main event suddenly felt like an afterthought. Chuck Norris took a single step forward, toward the cage. Just one deliberate movement. The arena fell silent again, breath collectively held. All eyes locked on the aging legend who, without a single word, had somehow taken control of the room. Cena stood in the center of the octagon, his showman's smile still fixed in place, but a new calculation visible behind his eyes. He had intended to get a reaction. Just not this one. Not this shifting of power. He gestured grandly toward Chuck, playing to the crowd. "Well? The cage is open, Chuck. Show us if Walker, Texas Ranger, still has what it takes." The gauntlet had been thrown down. The challenge made explicit. The crowd held its breath, waiting for Chuck's response. Would he walk away? Dignified, but dismissive. Would he finally speak, cut Cena down with words where the younger man had used so many? Instead, Chuck took another step forward, and then another. His path clear, his intention unmistakable. He was heading for the cage. The arena exploded. The main event fighters stood forgotten at the entrance tunnel, their moment stolen by something far more compelling. Security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, looking toward promoters for guidance that wasn't coming. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. This was raw, unpredictable, dangerous, exactly what the fight world thrived on. Chuck moved unhurriedly toward the octagon, each step measured and deliberate. No rush, no hesitation, just steady, inexorable progress. The crowd parted before him like water, phones recording his every move. His face remained impassive, but his eyes never left John Cena. Inside the cage, Cena's bravado flickered momentarily. He hadn't expected Chuck to accept his challenge. The playful mockery had been meant to entertain, to cement his position as the voice of the new generation. But as Chuck approached, Cena felt something he rarely experienced any more: uncertainty. He covered it quickly with an even wider grin, gesturing dramatically for someone to open the cage door. "Well, look at this. Chuck Norris is actually taking me up on it," he announced, voice still cocky but pitched slightly higher than before. "Somebody help the old-timer up those steps." No one laughed this time. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. Chuck reached the cage steps and paused. With the same unhurried movements, he removed his watch and handed it to a wide-eyed production assistant. He rolled up his sleeves meticulously, revealing forearms corded with muscle that belied his 75 years. The announcer, sensing history unfolding, stepped back up to his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what to say. This is unprecedented. Chuck Norris appears to be accepting John Cena's challenge." The cage door swung open. Chuck ascended the steps without assistance, moving with the fluid grace of a man half his age. He stepped through the door and into the octagon, the bright lights catching the silver in his hair, but also illuminating the undiminished strength in his stance. The two men stood 10 feet apart. The contrast was striking. Cena in his branded merchandise, muscles bulging, shifting his weight from foot to foot with nervous energy. Chuck in his simple black shirt, standing perfectly still, hands relaxed at his sides. The arena had gone so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. No one wanted to miss a word of what might come next. Cena, performer that he was, recovered first. "Chuck Norris, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for a true pioneer." He approached with his hand extended, playing the role of respectful host now that Chuck had called his bluff. "Just a bit of fun, Chuck. No hard feelings, right?" Chuck looked at the extended hand but didn't take it, not out of rudeness, but because the gesture seemed beside the point. He finally spoke, his voice quiet, yet somehow carrying to every corner of the hushed arena. "You wanted me in the cage. I'm here." 5 simple words, delivered without anger or challenge, just quiet certainty. The crowd erupted at the sound of his voice, then quickly hushed again, hungry for more. Cena's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He lowered his hand and glanced around the arena, playing to the crowd. "Come on, Chuck. We're just having some fun here. You didn't think I was actually challenging you to fight?" He forced a laugh. "I mean, I respect your legacy too much for that. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Chuck's expression didn't change. "Then why am I in the cage, John?" The directness of the question hung in the air. Cena found himself in unfamiliar territory, backpedaling. He was used to controlling narratives, directing attention. But Chuck's simple presence had shifted the dynamic entirely. "Look," Cena said. Louder now, making sure the crowd could hear every word. "You're Chuck Norris. You're a legend. But let's be real, you're also 75 years old. I'm in my prime. It wouldn't be fair." A murmur ran through the crowd. Cena was trying to find an exit strategy that preserved his dignity. "Fair," Chuck repeated, as if considering the concept. Then, with movements so fluid they seemed almost casual, he assumed a fighting stance. Not showy, not dramatic, just the balanced, centered posture of a man who had spent decades mastering his craft. "Try me," he said simply. The crowd exploded again. Phones raised high, capturing every second of the unscripted confrontation. The official fighters for the main event had been completely forgotten, left standing awkwardly at the tunnel entrance. Cena's face went through a rapid series of calculations, visible to everyone watching. To back down now would be humiliating. To actually fight a senior citizen, even one as legendary as Chuck Norris, could be career suicide. He settled on a third option. Play it off as an exhibition. "All right, Chuck," he said, raising his hands in an exaggerated shrug. "You want to show these people you've still got it? Let's give them a little demonstration." He beckoned to Chuck playfully. "Come on. Throw one of those famous roundhouse kicks. For old time's sake." It was a clever pivot, turning a potential fight into a showcase. With Cena graciously giving Chuck a moment in the spotlight. The crowd seemed satisfied with this direction, cheering at the prospect of seeing a Chuck Norris roundhouse kick in person. But Chuck didn't move, didn't adjust his stance, didn't play along with Cena's attempt to reframe the situation. "You first," Chuck said quietly. 3 seconds of absolute silence followed. Then Cena laughed, a genuine laugh born of surprise. "You want me to attack first? For real?" Chuck waited, stance unwavering. "Chuck, come on. I'm not going to." "You questioned whether I belong in this cage," Chuck interrupted, his voice level. "Now you're here with me. No cameras, no stunts, just you and me." The implication was clear. This wasn't about age or exhibition or entertainment anymore. This was about respect. Cena's expression hardened slightly. He glanced around the arena, then back at Chuck. Making a decision, he nodded once and assumed his own fighting stance, more aggressive than Chuck's. "Hands higher, weight forward." "Okay. Legend. Let's see what you've got." The announcer, realizing this had gone well beyond publicity stunt, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should—" But Cena was already moving. Not with full force, he wasn't foolish enough for that, but with speed and precision, throwing a quick jab toward Chuck's shoulder. A probing strike. A test. Chuck didn't block the punch. He wasn't there to receive it. With a subtle shift of weight, a movement so economical it was nearly invisible, he simply wasn't where Cena's fist expected him to be. The crowd gasped. Cena blinked in surprise, momentarily off balance. He recovered quickly, nodding with newfound respect. "Not bad for 75. Chuck said nothing, resuming his stance. Waiting. Something changed in Cena's demeanor. A competitive glint entering his eyes. The showmanship receded, replaced by genuine engagement. He circled slowly, measuring his opponent with new consideration. This time, his attack was more committed. A combination, still controlled but with intention behind it. Left jab, right cross. Quick step forward. Chuck's defense was a masterclass in efficiency. No wasted movement. No flashy blocks. He slipped the jab, deflected the cross with his forearm, and sidestepped the advance, all while maintaining perfect balance. The crowd was witnessing something extraordinary, not just an aging legend holding his own, but a fundamental difference in fighting philosophy. Cena was all power and dynamism. Chuck was economy and precision. Cena pressed forward, increasing the pressure. His strikes came faster now, more purposeful. Chuck continued to defend, making it look effortless, not because the attacks weren't skilled, but because his responses were so precisely calibrated. The arena had become a study in contrast. Cena growing more intense, more determined with each exchange. Chuck remaining calm, centered, unhurried. After a particularly aggressive combination from Cena that Chuck neutralized with seemingly minimal effort, Cena stepped back, breathing slightly harder. He studied Chuck with newfound respect, then nodded slowly. "I get it now," he said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You're proving a point." Chuck didn't respond verbally, But something shifted in his stance, a subtle change that only someone trained in combat would notice. He was no longer purely defensive. He was ready. Cena recognized the change instantly. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with determination. This was no longer an exhibition or a joke. This was a genuine test of skill across generations. He launched forward with his most committed attack, yet a flurry of strikes designed to overwhelm, to find a crack in Chuck's seemingly impenetrable defense. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed, his youth and power pushing Chuck backward half a step. Then it happened. Between one heartbeat and the next, Chuck transitioned from defense to offense. There was no telegraph, no wind-up, no warning. One moment he was defending. The next, his fist connected with Cena's solar plexus in a perfectly placed strike. It wasn't delivered with anger or excessive force. It was simply precise. Time to catch Cena between breaths, between thoughts. The impact wasn't dramatic, but its effect was immediate. Cena's forward momentum stopped abruptly. His eyes widened in genuine surprise. He took an involuntary step backward, one hand moving instinctively to his midsection. The crowd, which had been a continuous wall of noise, fell instantly silent, then erupted in a roar that threatened to take the roof off the arena. Cena stood there, stunned, not by the force of the blow, but by its precision, by the fact that it had landed at all. For years, he had been virtually untouchable in his domain. Now, an aging legend had not only defended against his best attacks, but had found an opening and exploited it with surgical accuracy. Chuck resumed his neutral stance, hands lowered slightly. The message was clear. He could have followed up, could have pressed his advantage. He chose not to. The two men stood facing each other in the center of the octagon, the moment suspended in time. Around them, 18,000 people witnessed something they hadn't expected. Not just a confrontation between old and new, but a masterclass in what true martial skill looked like, stripped of showmanship and bravado. Cena's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The cocky grin faded, replaced by something more genuine, a look of reassessment, of respect earned rather than assumed. He rubbed his midsection once more, then straightened to his full height. For the first time that night, John Cena did something completely unscripted, completely genuine. He bowed. The bow changed everything. It was subtle, just a slight incline of Cena's head and shoulders, but its significance reverberated through the arena. This wasn't part of the showman's repertoire. This wasn't calculated for audience reaction. This was genuine respect from one fighter to another. Chuck acknowledged it with a small nod, his expression unchanging. Neither man spoke. Neither needed to. The language being exchanged transcended words. The crowd, sensing the authenticity of the moment, responded with a different kind of energy, less frenzied, more reverent. Phones remained raised, capturing what many already recognized as a legendary exchange. But the moment of mutual respect didn't last long. Cena straightened, rubbing his midsection once more, his competitive instinct visibly reasserting itself. The surprise of Chuck's strike had momentarily humbled him. But John Cena hadn't become a 16-time world champion by accepting defeat. "Not bad, Chuck," he said, his voice carrying through the hushed arena. "You caught me. But landing one punch isn't winning a fight." He began circling again, his movements more measured now, more respectful. His earlier showboating was gone, replaced by focused intensity. He was treating this as a real contest now, not full force, but genuine. Chuck resumed his stance, calm as ever. His breathing remained steady, his gaze unwavering. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "It was never about winning, John. The simplicity of the statement seemed to perplex Cena momentarily. In his world, everything was about winning matches, championships, audience approval. The idea that this confrontation might be about something else required a mental adjustment, but he had no time to ponder it. Chuck was moving, advancing with the same unhurried grace that characterized everything he did, not rushing, not aggressive, just steadily closing distance. Cena responded instantly, his reflexes honed by years in the ring. He threw a defensive jab, intended to establish space. Chuck slipped it effortlessly, continuing his advance. Cena followed with a combination: jab, cross, hook, textbook execution, delivered with precision. Chuck's defense was a study in economy. Each block, each deflection used minimal energy, while maximizing effect. He seemed to anticipate Cena's attacks before they were launched, neutralizing them not through superior speed but through superior reading of body mechanics. The crowd watched in awe as Chuck, at 75, made defense look like an art form. This wasn't the flashy evasion of a young fighter. This was the distilled wisdom of decades, where every movement had purpose, where nothing was wasted. One man in the front row, a retired UFC fighter himself, leaned toward his companion. "Watch his eyes," he whispered. "Norris isn't watching Cena's hands or feet. He's reading his center of gravity." Old school. Cena pressed harder, frustration beginning to edge his attacks. He wasn't used to being read so easily, to having his offense neutralized with such apparent ease. He launched a particularly aggressive combination, putting real power behind it. Chuck not only defended but countered, landing a short, sharp strike to Cena's ribs, not punishing, just precise. Another reminder that defense could become offense in the blink of an eye. Cena stepped back, reassessing. His respect for Chuck was growing with each exchange, but so was his determination to prove himself. He was caught in an unfamiliar position, unable to overwhelm with power or showmanship, forced to engage on a purely technical level where his youth provided less advantage than he'd expected. "You're good, Chuck," he acknowledged, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Really good. But times change, fighters evolve." He launched forward with renewed purpose, his strikes coming faster, more varied. This wasn't exhibition anymore, this was Cena fighting to defend his generation, his approach to combat. Chuck met the onslaught with the same calm efficiency, but even his masterly defense was tested by Cena's athletic prime. A jab slipped through, grazing Chuck's shoulder. A low kick, partially connected. The crowd gasped, then cheered not out of disrespect for Chuck, but from the sheer drama of the contest unfolding before them. This wasn't the scheduled main event, but it had become something far more compelling. A clash, not just of individuals, but of philosophies, of eras. From his position against the cage, the commentator had abandoned any pretense of neutrality. "Ladies and gentlemen," he breathed into his microphone, "what we're seeing here transcends sport. This is tradition versus innovation, patience versus power. This is martial arts in its purest form." His colleague nodded, equally mesmerized. Cena represents everything modern MMA stands for: athleticism, adaptability, aggression, and Norris. Norris is showing us where it all came from. The roots, the foundation. In the cage, the two men continued their dance. Cena's movements had evolved throughout the exchange. Less flashy now, more focused. He was learning in real time, adapting to Chuck's style, finding a balance between his natural explosiveness and a new appreciation for economy. "You know," Cena said between combinations, his voice pitched for Chuck alone, "I've faced Olympic wrestlers, world champion boxers, jiu-jitsu masters. Never felt this. Outmatched. Chuck's expression didn't change, but his eyes registered the acknowledgement. He sidestepped another attack, his movement so minimal it barely registered as evasion. "It's not about technique," he replied quietly. "It's about timing." As if to demonstrate, he slipped inside Cena's guard with a movement so subtle it seemed like he'd teleported. Another strike landed not heavy, but precisely placed. Cena absorbed it, nodding with growing understanding. Around the cage, the scheduled main event fighters watched from the tunnel, their initial annoyance at having their moments stolen now replaced by professional appreciation. They were witnessing a masterclass in fighting philosophy, the flashy dynamism of the modern era meeting the distilled efficiency of traditional martial arts. "It's like watching water fight fire," one whispered to his coach. "Cena's all power and intensity. But Norris, he just flows around it." The coach nodded, eyes never leaving the cage. "Watch and learn, kid. You're seeing something special." Back in the octagon, Cena had adjusted his approach again. Instead of trying to overwhelm Chuck with combinations, he was now fighting more strategically, feinting, probing, looking for patterns. It was a level of technical fighting few had seen from him before, bringing his considerable physical gifts under more disciplined control. Chuck, for his part, seemed to approve of the evolution. His defense remained impenetrable, but there was a subtle shift in his counters. Less instructive now, more engaging. The exchange was becoming more reciprocal, a genuine dialogue between fighters rather than a lesson. The crowd sensed the shift, their energy changing again. The partisan chants had faded entirely, replaced by appreciative roars for particularly skillful sequences from either man. They weren't watching a contest anymore. They were witnessing a collaboration. In the VIP section, a retired boxing champion turned to his entourage. "This is why I love fighting," he said, gesturing toward the cage. "Forget the belts, the money, the fame. At its core, this is about respect, about testing yourself against the best, and growing from it." His companions nodded, equally entranced by the unexpected spectacle. Cena, breathing harder now but moving with new purpose, launched another attack, this one different from his previous efforts. Instead of pure aggression or technical probing, this sequence combined elements of both. He feinted high, struck low, then transitioned into a clinch attempt, mixing styles in a way that showed he wasn't just fighting Chuck, he was learning from him. Chuck defended expertly, but there was a flicker of appreciation in his eyes as he countered. Cena had adapted more quickly than expected, incorporating aspects of Chuck's efficiency into his own movement. As they separated, Cena's expression had transformed completely. The showman's grin was gone, replaced by focused concentration. He was fully present in a way that transcended performance. This wasn't about the crowd anymore. This was about the exchange itself. "All these years," Cena said, circling again, "I've been fighting to win, to dominate." Chuck nodded, understanding the realization Cena was working toward. "But this," Cena continued, gesturing subtly between them, "this is different. Fighting isn't about destruction," Chuck replied, his voice quiet but carrying clearly between them. "It's about communication." The wisdom of the statement resonated through Cena's expression. Something fundamental was shifting in his understanding not just of this particular exchange, but of his entire approach to combat. They engaged again, but differently now. The aggressive edge had left Cena's attacks, replaced by genuine inquiry. Each combination was a question, each counter from Chuck an answer. The physical dialogue deepened, becoming more nuanced, more respectful. The arena had fallen into a reverent hush, 18,000 people collectively holding their breath, afraid to miss a moment of the unexpected masterclass unfolding before them. Even the commentators had fallen silent, recognizing that words would only diminish the purity of what they were witnessing. In this silence, the sound of each strike, each footfall on the canvas acquired its own significance. The rhythm of combat became a language unto itself, understood by those who had studied it, but rarely heard spoken with such fluency. Cena pressed forward, executing a combination with textbook precision. Chuck defended, countered, redirected. Their movements began to flow together, less like combat and more like conversation, a physical dialogue about balance, timing, efficiency, power. After a particularly complex exchange, both men stepped back, reassessing. Cena was breathing harder, sweat glistening on his shoulders. Chuck remained composed, his breath controlled, his stance unwavering. But something had changed between them, a mutual recognition, a shared understanding that transcended their differences. "You know," Cena said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, "when I called you out, I thought I was giving you a chance to share my spotlight." He shook his head, genuine self-awareness dawning in his expression. "But that was never what this was about, was it?" Chuck's face remained impassive, but his eyes registered the question. "For you?" Cena continued. "It was never about spotlights or showing off or proving something. It was about principle." Chuck nodded once, the minimal acknowledgement carrying more weight than any elaborate response could have. "Respect," Cena said, the word hanging in the air between them, not demanded because of achievements or fame, but earned through action. The crowd had gone so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. This wasn't what they had expected, not a physical battle, but a philosophical revelation played out in real time, through the universal language of combat. "I've been doing this all wrong," Cena said, the admission carrying no shame, only realization. "Treating fighting like performance, like spectacle." "There's value in entertainment," Chuck replied, his voice level. "But at its core, this," he gestured between them, "is about truth." The simplicity of the statement seemed to resonate not just with Cena, but with everyone present. The social media feeds streaming from the arena exploded with quotes, with video clips, with recognition that what they were witnessing wasn't just an unexpected physical confrontation, but a moment of genuine philosophical transmission. The scheduled main event fighters watched from the tunnel, their expressions a mixture of awe and disappointment. They had trained for months for tonight, perfecting techniques, cutting weight, preparing mentally. Yet they understood, perhaps better than anyone, that what was happening in the cage transcended sport. This was legacy being passed, wisdom being shared, respect being earned in the most fundamental way possible through direct experience. Cena rolled his shoulders, loosening up for what felt like a final exchange. His earlier mockery felt distant now, replaced by genuine engagement. He had entered the cage, expecting to give an aging legend a moment of spotlight. Instead, he was receiving a profound lesson in what fighting truly meant beyond spectacle. "One more?" he asked Chuck, just loud enough to be heard over the crowd's hushed anticipation. Chuck nodded once, resuming his stance. Cena approached more thoughtfully this time, his movements measured. He feinted, probed, tested Chuck's defenses with disciplined precision rather than overwhelming aggression. Chuck responded in kind, his defense as impenetrable as ever but with subtle adjustments that acknowledged Cena's evolution. Their final exchange was less a battle and more a dialogue, each man communicating through movement what words could never capture. The crowd remained silent, sensing the gravity of what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was art. When they finally stepped back from each other, something had fundamentally changed between them. Cena stood taller, his showman's persona stripped away, replaced by something more authentic. Chuck remained as he had been throughout, centered, composed, present. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice broke the spell, "I think we've just witnessed something truly historic." The crowd's response was thunderous, but different from their earlier reactions, less partisan, more unified. They weren't cheering for Chuck or for Cena anymore. They were applauding the exchange itself, the rare privilege of seeing two masters from different eras find common ground in the language they both spoke fluently. Cena extended his hand, no cameras to play to, no audience to impress, just one fighter acknowledging another. This time, Chuck took it. The handshake between Chuck Norris and John Cena lasted only seconds, but the image was seared into the memory of everyone present. Two men from different generations, different fighting philosophies, different approaches to fame, finding respect in the crucible of direct confrontation. As they released the handshake, the scheduled main event fighters shifted uncomfortably at the entrance tunnel. Their moment had been completely overshadowed, their battle rendered anticlimactic before it even began. How could they possibly follow what had just transpired? The announcer, sensing the awkwardness of the transition, stepped into the octagon. "Ladies and gentlemen, an incredible, unexpected display of martial arts mastery. And now, let's welcome our main event fighters." But the crowd's attention remained fixed on Chuck and Cena, still standing in the center of the cage. Neither seemed in any hurry to leave. Something remained unresolved between them, not hostile, but incomplete. Cena, ever the performer, turned to address the audience. "You know what? I came here tonight to entertain, to have some fun." His voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something more thoughtful. "I called out a legend, thinking I knew what that meant." He turned back to Chuck, genuine respect evident in his posture. "I was wrong," the crowd murmured, surprised by the candid admission from a man whose brand was built on unwavering confidence. "Chuck Norris isn't a legend because of some internet memes or old TV shows," Cena continued. "He's a legend because of what you all just witnessed. Mastery that doesn't fade, that doesn't need spotlights or trash talk to prove its worth." Chuck remained characteristically silent, but his steady gaze acknowledged Cena's words. The main event fighters had now reached the cage steps, visibly uncertain about how to proceed. The scheduled program was derailed, the audience's attention firmly elsewhere. Cena noticed their discomfort and made a decision. "We've taken enough time from these fighters," he said, gesturing toward the entrance. "They came to show their skills, and we should respect that." He turned to exit, moving toward the cage door with Chuck beside him. The crowd responded with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. They wanted more of the impromptu masterclass, but they recognized the professionalism of giving the scheduled fighters their moment. As they reached the cage door, a voice called out from the audience, "One punch!" The cry was taken up by others. "One punch! One punch!" The chant spread rapidly, swelling to fill the arena. "One punch! One punch!" Chuck and Cena paused at the threshold. The request was clear. The audience wanted a definitive moment, something to crystallize the lesson of the night. Not a full fight, not an extended exchange, just one clean, honest strike, to serve as exclamation point. Cena turned to Chuck, eyebrows raised in question. Chuck's expression remained impassive, but after a moment, he nodded once. The crowd exploded as the two men moved back to the center of the octagon. The main event fighters, recognizing the inevitability of the moment, stepped back from the cage, understanding their time would come. "This wasn't in the program," whispered one executive to another in the VIP section. "Legal's going to have a fit." "Are you kidding?" came the reply. This will be the most watched clip in combat sports history by morning. Let it happen. In the press section, journalists typed frantically, already composing the headlines that would dominate sports pages worldwide. Social media feeds exploded with anticipation. Hashtags multiplying by the second. Number 1 punch. Number Cena vs Norris. Number legends meet. Cena and Chuck faced each other again, but differently now. No circling, no testing of defenses, just two men standing an arm's length apart, eye to eye. "Your call, Chuck," Cena said. Voice pitched for Chuck alone. "How do you want to do this?" Chuck considered for a moment, then spoke quietly. "A single exchange. Your best against mine." Cena nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Full contact?" The corner of Chuck's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Don't hold back on my account." They stepped apart, assuming their fighting stances. The arena fell into expectant silence, 18,000 people collectively holding their breath. This was the moment they would tell their friends about, post on social media about, remember years later. In the front row, a retired boxing champion leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Watch Norris's breathing," he murmured to his companion. "He's centering himself. Old school preparation." Nearby, a film director who had worked with both men on separate projects shook his head in amazement. "Cena's whole demeanor has changed," he observed. "He walked in there all showmanship. Now he looks like a student facing a master." The announcer, recognizing the historical significance, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," at the request of the crowd and with the agreement of both men, one final exchange between John Cena and Chuck Norris. The crowd roared, then quickly hushed itself, not wanting to miss a moment. No referee gave the signal. No bell rang. The two men simply locked eyes, acknowledging the unspoken countdown between them. Time seemed to slow, each fraction of a second stretching into eternity. The arena lights caught the sweat on Cena's shoulders, the silver in Chuck's hair. Two bodies, separated by 5 decades of life, but united in this singular moment of truth. Cena moved first, as youth often does. He launched forward with explosive power, throwing not a wild haymaker but a textbook-perfect straight right, his best punch. Delivered with technical precision and the full force of his athletic prime behind it. It was a strike that had finished opponents in their physical peak, that had earned him championships and acclaim. The punch cut through the air with audible force, its trajectory perfectly aligned. In the microseconds of its flight, thousands of camera flashes erupted, capturing the moment in stop-motion detail. Cena's perfect form, the extension of his arm, the controlled aggression in his expression. Chuck didn't attempt to block or evade. Instead, at the precise moment Cena committed to his strike, Chuck threw his own punch, a simple, economical counter that slipped past Cena's extended arm. From the commentator's position, the veteran analyst gasped. "Look at that timing. He's not reacting to Cena's punch. He's anticipating it." His colleague nodded, equally mesmerized. "That's the difference between a fighter and a master. Cena sees the now. Norris sees what's coming before it happens." The two punches were philosophical opposites. Cena's was dynamic, powerful, the embodiment of youth and strength. Chuck's was efficient, precise, the distillation of decades of experience into a single motion. Both landed. Cena's fist connected with Chuck's shoulder, not the head, a conscious choice born of respect, despite the agreement to go full force. The impact was solid, significant, the kind that would have staggered many fighters. Chuck didn't stagger. He absorbed the blow with minimal movement, his core stability neutralizing much of its effect. It was as if the energy of Cena's strike had entered Chuck's body, and simply dissipated, finding no purchase in the older man's rooted stance. Chuck's punch, meanwhile, connected with Cena's solar plexus perfectly placed, time to land between heartbeats. Not thrown with anger or excessive force, but with something far more powerful. Absolute precision. The moment of impact contained multitudes. In that fraction of a second, physics, physiology, and philosophy converged the perfect alignment of body mechanics. The strategic targeting of the diaphragm, the embodiment of the principle that true power comes from precision rather than force. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Cena's forward momentum stopped as if he'd hit an invisible wall. His eyes widened in genuine shock. The breath left his body in a rush. For a fraction of a second, he seemed frozen in place. Then he dropped to one knee. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that, but from the sheer physics of the strike. Chuck had found the exact point where balance, breathing, and forward movement intersected, and he had disrupted all three with a single, perfect punch. The arena exploded into sound, a primal roar, born of witnessing something extraordinary. Not the violence of the exchange, but its purity, its truth. In the VIP section, a renowned physicist turned to his companions, face alight with professional appreciation. "That," he said, pointing to the cage, "was a perfect demonstration of force transfer. Minimal energy expended for maximum effect." Next to him, a retired martial arts champion nodded. "Internal power," he murmured. "Something most fighters never truly understand, let alone master." In the press section, fingers flew across keyboards, struggling to capture in words what had just transpired. One veteran journalist, who had covered combat sports for 3 decades, simply sat back in his chair, shaking his head in wonder. "In 40 years," he said to no one in particular, "I've never seen anything like that." Inside the cage, time seemed suspended. Chuck stood over Cena, not in triumph or aggression, but with the same centered calm he'd displayed throughout. He extended his hand. Cena, still trying to recapture his breath, looked up. In that moment, kneeling before the man he'd mocked for his age, he understood something fundamental. This wasn't about who was stronger or faster. This was about the difference between using strength and embodying it. The cameras caught his expression, in perfect clarity, the exact moment of revelation, of genuine humility, born not from defeat, but from enlightenment. He took Chuck's hand and rose to his feet, still slightly hunched from the precision of the strike. When he straightened, his face had transformed. The cocky grin was gone, replaced by genuine wonder and respect. "That," he managed, voice slightly hoarse, "was a hell of a punch." Chuck nodded once. The acknowledgement of one professional to another. Around them, the crowd continued its thunderous response, the sound building in waves that crashed against the arena walls and rebounded. Fans who had come expecting entertainment had received education. Those who had come for spectacle had witnessed art. In the tunnel, one of the main event fighters turned to his coach. "I've never seen anything like that," he said, echoing the journalist's words without knowing it. The coach, who had been in the fight game for decades, nodded slowly. "That wasn't just a punch," he replied. "That was a life lesson with a fist attached to it." Back in the center of the cage, Cena had recovered enough to stand straight. His breathing was returning to normal, though his hand remained protectively near his solar plexus. "Chuck," he said, his voice carrying surprisingly well through the noise. "I've taken shots from heavyweights that didn't feel like that. What exactly did you hit me with?" Chuck's expression remained calm, but something like approval flickered in his eyes at the genuine question. "Not about where I hit," he replied simply. "It's about when." Cena nodded slowly, processing the wisdom. "Timing over power? Timing is power." Chuck corrected gently. The crowd had begun to quiet, straining to hear the exchange between the two men. This wasn't just an aftermath. It was the continuation of the lesson. "I've spent 20 years building muscle," Cena said, gesturing to his impressive physique, training explosiveness, power, endurance. Chuck nodded, acknowledging the dedication that path required. "But what you just did," Cena continued, genuine curiosity in his voice, "that's something else entirely." "External strength," Chuck said, gesturing toward Cena's body, "has limits. Internal understanding doesn't." The simplicity of the statement belied its profound truth. Cena absorbed it, nodding slowly as the implications rippled through his understanding of combat, of strength, of mastery itself. Around the cage, thousands of phones remained raised, recording every word, every gesture. This unexpected confrontation had transcended sport or entertainment. It had become a rare moment of genuine transmission between generations, between approaches, between philosophies. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice cut through the diminishing noise, "what we've witnessed here tonight is unprecedented. A moment that will be talked about for years to come." His words, though accurate, seemed almost superfluous. Everyone present already understood the significance of what they had seen. The punch already capitalized in the collective consciousness would be analyzed in dojos and gyms worldwide, dissected in sports science labs, replayed in countless video essays about the nature of true martial arts mastery. But beyond the technical aspects, beyond the physics and physiology, was something more profound. In an age of constant noise, of endless self-promotion, of style over substance, Chuck Norris had demonstrated the power of the opposite approach, of quiet confidence, of substance over style, of letting actions speak louder than words. And John Cena, to his immense credit, had recognized and acknowledged the lesson. The crowd's roar continued unabated, phones capturing the moment from every angle. In the media section, journalists typed frantically, social media feeds flooded with clips of the punch from multiple angles, each one revealing new details of its perfect execution. Headlines were already forming, "The punch heard round the world." "Age before beauty. Norris schools Cena. One punch, one lesson." But in the center of the octagon, surrounded by noise and lights and cameras, Chuck and Cena existed in a moment of perfect understanding. What had begun as mockery had transformed into masterclass. What had started as a clash of generations had become a bridge between them. Chuck leaned in close, speaking words meant only for Cena. "It's not about age," he said quietly. "It's about patience, discipline, knowing that true strength doesn't need to announce itself." Cena nodded, absorbing the lesson on a level deeper than physical. "I won't forget this," he promised. And as they turned together to exit the cage, making room for the scheduled main event that suddenly seemed like an afterthought, 18,000 witnesses knew they wouldn't forget it either. The image was indelible. The younger man, humbled but enlightened, walking beside the older man, dignified but not triumphant. Not victory and defeat, but teaching and learning the eternal cycle by which wisdom passes from one generation to the next. As they reached the cage door, Cena paused, turning to Chuck once more. "Thank you," he said simply. Chuck nodded once, the words unnecessary between them now. Then they stepped through the door together, leaving the octagon as different men than when they had entered it. Behind them, the crowd's roar continued. But it had changed in character, less frenzied, more appreciative. They weren't cheering a victor, they were acknowledging a moment of truth. In that moment, in the Las Vegas arena, packed with thousands of witnesses, something rare and precious had occurred, a genuine transfer of wisdom. Not through words or theories, but through direct experience. Through one perfect punch that contained within it decades of discipline, years of patient practice, a lifetime of understanding that true power comes not from volume but from precision, the main event fighters finally entered the cage, ready to begin their scheduled bout. But everyone present understood that the real main event had already occurred, not a fight, but a lesson. Not a contest, but a transmission. One punch. One moment of perfect truth. One bridge across the generations that would endure long after the night's cheers had faded into silence. The aftermath unfolded like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. By the time Chuck Norris and John Cena exited the cage, social media was already ablaze. Number One Punch trended worldwide. Video clips of their exchange proliferated across platforms, each view count climbing into the millions within hours. The scheduled main event proceeded, but the energy in the arena had fundamentally changed. The crowd watched respectfully, appreciatively, but with the distracted air of people who had already witnessed the defining moment of the evening. The fighters performed admirably, displaying technical skill and heart, yet they fought in the shadow of what had transpired before them. "It's like following the Beatles," one commentator whispered to his colleague. "These guys could put on the fight of the year, and everyone would still be talking about Norris and Cena tomorrow." His partner nodded in agreement. Some moments transcend sport. What we saw tonight wasn't just about fighting, it was about wisdom being passed down in the most direct way possible. In the executive suite, promotion officials huddled over phones and tablets, simultaneously concerned about the unscripted nature of what had occurred and exhilarated by the viral explosion already underway. "Legal's going to have questions," one executive muttered, scrolling through a cascade of notifications. "Let them ask," replied the CEO, eyes still fixed on the tunnel where Chuck and Cena had disappeared. "What happened tonight will be worth whatever headaches follow. That was authentic. You can't buy that kind of moment." Backstage, in the labyrinthine corridors of the arena, Chuck moved with the same unhurried confidence he'd displayed in the octagon. Staff members nodded respectfully as he passed. Fighters from the undercard stepped aside, some attempting to hide their smartphones as they replayed the clip of the punch that was already viral. A young production assistant, barely in her 20s, gathered the courage to approach him. "Mr. Norris," she began, voice wavering slightly. "My grandfather was one of your first students in California. He told me stories about your classes my whole life." Chuck paused, giving her his full attention despite the chaos around them. He didn't speak, but his eyes registered recognition of something important being shared. "He always said you taught him that real strength was about character, not technique." She swallowed nervously. "Tonight, I saw exactly what he meant." Chuck nodded once, the simple acknowledgement carrying more weight than any elaborate response. Then he continued on his way, moving through the backstage area with the quiet dignity that had become his signature. Unlike many celebrities who would have lingered to bask in the moment, Chuck seemed uninterested in the aftermath of what had transpired. For him, the lesson had been delivered. There was nothing more to add. Security personnel cleared a path through gathering media members, their questions flying like arrows. "Chuck, how does it feel to show up a fighter half your age? Was that planned or spontaneous? Any message for the young fighters watching tonight?" He acknowledged them with a glance but offered no answers. Some things couldn't be explained in sound bites. In a quiet corner near the exit, he paused. John Cena was waiting, leaning against the wall, a bag of ice pressed to his midsection. The showman's grin was back, but transformed, less performative, more genuine. "I figured you'd slip out the back," Cena said as Chuck approached. "Not big on curtain calls, are you?" Chuck's expression remained composed, but something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Never saw the point. Cena chuckled, then winced slightly, adjusting the ice pack. Damn, Chuck. What exactly did you hit me with? Felt like you rearranged my internal organs. Just a punch, Chuck replied simply. Then, after a pause, took me 20 years to perfect it. 20 years? Cena shook his head in amazement. I've been fighting professionally for 2 decades, and I'm still learning basics compared to that. Chuck considered this. Different paths, different purposes. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. 2 fighters from different worlds, finding unexpected common ground. Around them, the arena continued to buzz with activity crew members breaking down equipment, security guiding VIPs toward exits, fans filtering out into the Las Vegas night, still animated by what they'd witnessed. From around the corner came the distinct sound of camera shutters. The media had located them. Chuck's expression didn't change, but a subtle tension appeared in his shoulders. Cena noticed immediately. Not your scene, huh? He straightened, grimacing slightly from the lingering effects of Chuck's strike. Follow me. He led Chuck down a service corridor, away from the approaching press. Years of navigating arenas had taught Cena all the hidden pathways. They emerged into a quiet loading area, momentarily free from prying eyes. I owe you an apology, Cena said once they were alone, his tone more serious. What I said out there about your age, about you being past your prime, that was disrespectful. Chuck waved it off. Words don't matter. Actions do. Yeah. Well, your actions spoke pretty damn clearly, Cena replied, gesturing at the ice pack with a rueful smile. Consider your point made. Chuck nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement without need for elaboration. You know what's crazy? Cena continued, leaning back against equipment crate. 10 minutes with you taught me more about real fighting than 10 years with world-class trainers. Chuck raised an eyebrow slightly. Waiting. It's not just about the technique, Cena elaborated, working through his realization in real time. It's about presence. Being completely in the moment. No ego. No crowd. No cameras. Just pure focus. Mindfulness, Chuck said quietly. Being present without attachment. Cena snapped his fingers. Exactly. That's what I felt from you in there. Complete presence. He shook his head in wonder. I've spent my whole career performing, thinking about how each move looks to the crowd, to the cameras. But you weren't performing at all. You were just being. Chuck considered this, then spoke with quiet conviction. Performing requires energy. Being conserves it. The wisdom of the statement hung in the air between them. Not a rehearsed platitude, but a truth lived through decades of discipline. All my career, I've believed that the louder you are, the more attention you command, the more respect you get, Cena continued. It's worked for me. Championships, movie deals, merchandise, being loud gets results. He paused, looking directly at Chuck. But tonight, you were the quietest man in an arena of 18,000, and every eye was on you. Every ear strained to catch your words. That's a different kind of power. Chuck considered this, then spoke with quiet conviction. Noise impresses at first. Silence endures. From around the corner came the sound of approaching voices, security personnel, escorting someone. A moment later, a production assistant appeared. Mr. Cena? The post-event press conference is starting. They're asking for you. Cena nodded, then turned back to Chuck. They'll want you there too. The media's going crazy over what happened. Chuck shook his head slightly. Not my style. Cena laughed. No, I suppose it wouldn't be. He extended his hand. I learned something important tonight, Chuck. Thank you for the lesson. Chuck took his hand, the handshake firm but not performative. You're a good fighter, John. Could be a great one. Cena's eyebrows rose. After what happened in there, I thought I already was. Being great isn't about never getting knocked down, Chuck said. It's about what you learn when you do. The wisdom of the statement resonated with Cena in a way that surprised him. Throughout his career, he had experienced few moments of genuine humility, few opportunities to reassess his understanding of strength. Tonight had provided both. I won't forget this, Cena said, echoing his words from the cage. Chuck nodded once, then turned to leave, his part in the evening's drama complete. Chuck, Cena called after him. One more thing. Chuck paused, looking back. Next time someone asks me who the toughest opponent I ever faced was, Cena said with a grin, I'm going to tell them it was a 75-year-old man who took my best shot and didn't even blink. For the first time that evening, Chuck Norris smiled a small, genuine expression that transformed his stoic features. He gave Cena a slight nod of acknowledgement, then continued toward the exit, disappearing into the Las Vegas night as quietly as he had arrived. Cena watched him go, still holding the ice pack to his midsection, still processing the lessons of the evening. Then he squared his shoulders, adjusted his cap, and turned toward the press conference, knowing the first question would inevitably be about the punch. 3 days later, in a quiet dojo in Texas, Chuck moved through his morning routine with the same deliberate precision that had defined his life for decades. The events in Las Vegas might as well have occurred in another lifetime, so completely had he returned to his daily discipline. No interviews given, no media appearances, no capitalization on the renewed attention that had exploded across the internet and sports world. The viral moment had generated thousands of requests for comments, appearances, endorsements, all declined with polite finality by his long-suffering assistant. Chuck, she had pleaded the day after the event. At least consider the Sports Illustrated cover. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He had shaken his head once, returning to his tea. Already had plenty of those. Now, as he completed his training session, a notification appeared on his phone, one of the few he allowed through his digital fortress. It was a video link, sent by an old friend from his tournament days. Reluctantly, Chuck tapped the screen. The video opened to show John Cena at the press conference following the event, surrounded by journalists, firing questions about what had transpired in the cage. John, what was it like taking a punch from Chuck Norris? Cena, cleaned up but still bearing the subtle marks of their encounter, laughed. It was educational, he replied. Highly educational. The room erupted in laughter, but Cena raised his hand, his expression growing serious. No, I mean that sincerely. What happened in that cage wasn't about age or strength or who's better. It was about two different approaches to the same art form. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've built my career on being visible, on commanding attention. Chuck built his on substance, on mastery that doesn't need spotlights to validate it. And tonight, he taught me something I won't forget. A journalist called out, "Are you saying he's better than you?" Cena considered this thoughtfully. I'm saying he understands something fundamental that I'm just beginning to grasp. That true mastery isn't about external validation, it's internal. It doesn't need to announce itself or prove anything to anyone. He gestured to his midsection, where Chuck's punch had landed. That wasn't just a physical lesson, it was a philosophical one, and I'm grateful for it. Another question came. Will there be a rematch? Cena laughed, genuinely. No, absolutely not. Some things don't need sequels. What happened tonight was perfect, exactly as it was a moment of truth between two people from different generations, different approaches. He grew serious again. I walked into that cage thinking I was giving a legend a moment in the spotlight. But that was my ego talking. Chuck Norris doesn't need spotlights. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. That's a level of security, of self-knowledge, that I can only aspire to. Chuck paused the video. A small nod of approval. His only reaction. Cena had understood the true lesson, not just the physical one, but the deeper truth it represented. In the weeks that followed, the impact rippled outward in ways neither Chuck nor Cena could have anticipated. Dojo enrollments spiked nationwide, particularly among adults who had long been curious about martial arts but hesitant to begin. Teachers reported a new emphasis on questions about philosophy, about the mental aspects of training, about patience and discipline, rather than just physical technique. We used to get people asking how quickly they could earn a black belt. One sensei told a local newspaper. Now, they're asking how to develop the kind of presence Chuck Norris showed that night. It's a fundamental shift in motivation. For Cena, the transformation was equally profound but more visible. His next public appearance featured a noticeably different demeanor, still charismatic, still engaging, but with a new dimension of authenticity that fans immediately recognized and responded to. His social media presence, once dominated by motivational slogans and workout videos, began to include moments of genuine reflection. One post, showing him practicing forms in an empty gym at dawn, was captioned simply, "Learning to be present, learning to be still." It garnered more engagement than any of his previous content. When asked about Chuck Norris in interviews, he spoke with unvarnished respect. "I thought I was giving a legend a moment in the spotlight," he told one interviewer. "Turns out he was giving me a masterclass in what it really means to be strong." In fighting circles, the technical aspects of the punch became the subject of intense analysis. Slow-motion breakdowns appeared on sports science programs, with experts marveling at the precision of Chuck's timing, the efficiency of his movement, the perfect mechanical alignment of the strike. "What we witnessed wasn't just experience overcoming youth," one analyst explained, frame by frame, footage playing behind him. "It was the difference between power and precision. Cena's strike contained more raw force, but Norris's contained perfect placement, perfect timing. It's the difference between using strength and embodying it." The scheduled main event fighters eventually received their due recognition, their technical skills appropriately analyzed and praised. But in the collective memory of those present that night in Las Vegas, the true main event had been unplanned, the moment when arrogance met humility, when youth confronted wisdom, when Chuck Norris landed one perfect punch and taught John Cena that respect is earned, not demanded. 6 months later, in a community center in Boston, John Cena stood before a group of at-risk teenagers, his usual merchandise nowhere in sight. Instead, he wore simple workout clothes, his demeanor focused but approachable. "Before we start," he said to the attentive group, "I want to tell you a story about the most important lesson I ever learned about strength." The teenagers, initially drawn by the celebrity appearance, found themselves captivated by the tale of his encounter with Chuck Norris. Not the highlight reel version that had gone viral, but the deeper truth beneath it. "I walked into that cage thinking strength was about power, about dominance," Cena explained. "I walked out understanding that true strength is about discipline, about patience, about being so secure in yourself that you don't need to prove anything to anyone." He demonstrated a simple stance. Feet planted firmly, body balanced. "This program isn't about teaching you to fight," he continued. "It's about teaching you to be centered, to be present, to find strength within yourself rather than trying to take it from others." He smiled, touching his solar plexus briefly, the spot where Chuck's punch had landed all those months ago. Trust me, that's a lesson I learned the hard way. And somewhere in Texas, in his quiet dojo, Chuck Norris continued his daily practice, unchanged by the viral fame of the punch or the renewed attention it had brought. For him, nothing had changed because nothing needed to change. The moment in Las Vegas had simply been the natural expression of principles he had lived by for decades. That true mastery speaks for itself. That respect must be earned through action, not demanded through words. That real power lies not in dominating others but in mastering oneself. He moved through his forms with the same deliberate precision, each motion embodying the philosophy that had guided his life. Patience over impulse, precision over power, substance over show. And in dojos and gyms across the world, students gathered around screens to watch the footage, to study the economy of movement, the perfect timing, the embodied wisdom of decades condensed into a single, perfect strike. They dissected the mechanics, analyzed the footwork, debated the technique. But the wisest among them understood that what they were witnessing transcended technique. It was a rare glimpse of true mastery, not just of fighting, but of living, of being so completely aligned with one's principles that every action, however small, becomes a perfect expression of who you are. That was the lasting legacy of the punch, not its viral fame or its technical brilliance, but the timeless truth it embodied. That real strength needs no announcement. That true mastery seeks no validation. That respect, when earned rather than demanded, endures long after the roar of the crowd has faded into silence. In the end, Chuck Norris didn't need to defeat John Cena. He needed only to teach him, and by extension, all those watching, that beneath the spectacle and showmanship of modern combat lies a timeless truth. Real power speaks for itself, and real fighters let their actions do the talking. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.